Sam Rockwell's surprise cameo in The White Lotus Season 3 offers one of the most important, and hilariously bizarre, moments in the latest installment of the hit HBO series. After Rick Hatchett takes a flight to Bangkok in The White Lotus Season 3, Episode 4, we find him meeting with an old friend and business associate in Episode 5, Full Moon Party. Rick, played by two-time Emmy nominee Walton Goggins, arrives in Bangkok with a deadly agenda involving the owners of the White Lotus Thai Resort, Jim and Sritala Hollinger. Rick had initially hoped to encounter Jim at the White Lotus. Rick is convinced that Jim, who has yet to appear in the series but will be played by Scott Glenn, killed his father years ago. Now Rick wants revenge, which his girlfriend Chelsea is worried about when she tells him not to do anything stupid. Before Rick travels to Bangkok, little is known about his life and connections, particularly what he does for a living. Some clarity is offered when Sam Rockwell's Frank shows up to give Rick an unmarked black bag, which ends up containing a handgun. Frank then reveals some strange details about what he's been up to since Rick saw him last. Rick and Frank's backstory and connection in The White Lotus Season 3 explained. Frank had to flee the United States likely for criminal reasons. Rick, Walton Goggins, putting his hands together to thank in The White Lotus Season 3 EP4. Image via Max. When Rick and Frank first encounter each other in The White Lotus Season 3, Episode 5, it's clear that they haven't seen each other in quite some time. It's evident that Rick reached out to Frank knowing he was in Bangkok. However, Frank is not the person who Rick is there to kill, that's Jim Hollinger. Frank is certainly a friend who, as Rick discovers, has a problematic relationship with various forms of addiction, such as booze, drugs, and casual sex. Before Frank gets into all that, Rick learns that Frank's been sober for 10 months, which is why he orders herbal tea while Rick orders scotch. Rick is stunned by the news of Frank's sobriety, recalling that in all the time he's known him, they have never hung out sober. Frank explains that his time in Thailand has opened up his spiritual side, which led him to give up his destructive and circular hedonistic lifestyle. After Frank gives Rick the black bag with a hidden gun, it's implied that someone like him who has access to that type of weaponry is likely involved in some shady and potentially criminal activity. This is confirmed when Frank says that he had to leave the States, presumably evading police like Gary, aka Greg. Sam Rockwell's connection to the White Lotus Season 3's cast explained. He's been in a relationship with a cast member for nearly 2 decades. Chelsea, Amy Lou Wood, and Rick, Walton Goggins, in The White Lotus Season 3 EP4. Image via Max. There are some behind-the-scenes reasons as to why Sam Rockwell showing up by surprise in The White Lotus Season 3 makes sense. The Oscar-winning actor has been in a relationship with Leslie Bibb, who plays Kate Bow in The White Lotus Season 3, since 2007. Although Rockwell and Bibb don't have any scenes together in the episode, there's no denying that Bibb's casting had something to do with the uncredited cameo in The White Lotus Season 3. Although Rockwell and Bibb have been officially together for 18 years, the couple is not legally married and does not have any children. Frank's explanation that he wanted to be one of the Asian girls blows Rick's mind to the point where he appears numb. Frank continues to wax philosophical about gender identity and sex as a poetic metaphor for self-discovery. Rick looks like he's about to fall out of his seat when Frank finally arrives at the point. He stopped taking drugs and got into Buddhism, which explains his sobriety at their hangout. Frank got himself off the never-ending carousel of lust and suffering, which many of the White Lotus Season 3 guests appear to be on. What is Sam Rockwell's Frank going to do for Rick in The White Lotus Season 3? Frank gives Rick a weapon and may be a part of Rick's escape plan or alibi. Besides completely blowing Rick's mind, Frank helps Rick out by giving him a weapon that Rick plans to use to kill Jim Hollinger. Frank is clearly living a spiritually inspired life after leaving behind his hedonistic lifestyle, which Rick doesn't judge him for, but apparently, his view on violence hasn't changed. Before Frank leaves, Rick asks him for one more favor, which ironically, is a bit of roleplay. What Rick means is that he wants Frank to be available to give an alibi for Rick if necessary, perhaps lying and saying that he was with Rick if the police came asking him questions. There could be more to Frank's roleplay, such as Rick getting more involved in the murder or the getaway itself, but viewers will have to wait and see in future episodes of The White Lotus Season 3. Rick and Frank speak cryptically about Rick's business, which is hilariously contrasted by Frank's open-book vulnerability about his spiritual journey. Frank knows not to ask questions, which implies that the two of them have previously worked together on similar types of criminal endeavors. Whatever the case, Rick is planning to kill Jim the following night. The reason why Frank had to leave the United States remains unclear but could be explored further by the end of The White Lotus Season 3.